Hey everyone, it's Tim. Glad to check in here with the midweek update, and I hope by God's grace you're doing well this week. I want to talk for a bit about following up with something that came up in Equipping Hour this last Sunday and something that came up in the sermon. So, really, two resource recommendations or resource suggestions. Regarding Equipping Hour, we looked at the issue of kind of the decision to have children, a lot of issues related to what the Bible says about the value of children. Some complex issues like contraception. We looked at adoption, abortion, artificial reproductive technologies, things like this. Well, we did discuss the artificial reproductive technology of in vitro fertilization. We also talked about adoption. There's a really interesting article that came out late November in the publication Christianity Today. That's called Frozen Embryos Are the New Orphan Crisis. And it's all about this idea of embryo adoption. Many embryos, that is a very young life, as we understand biblically, created through in vitro fertilization. Many more than parents are prepared to bring to birth. And so there's many excess embryos frozen from this process, which from a biblical dignity of life standpoint is very concerning because many of these are discarded, which means killed. But there are people facilitating adoptions, couples that are adopting these frozen embryos and implanting and raising them as their own children. So there's this article written from a Christian standpoint examining this. It's interesting because it kind of looks at some of the ethical tensions regarding, on the one hand, the goodness of doing this as a work of mercy in the interest of life, but also other Christians raising concerns. Does Christians doing this kind of help encourage more of this practice of creating these basically lives that are being used so cheaply and discarded? So is it kind of unintentionally promoting the culture of really a culture of death, as I think Al Mohler calls it, of just creating life in order to destroy it? So it's a fascinating and helpful article, and maybe this is something, who knows, that God might have some among us to consider prayerfully as a means of adoption. I'm going to link in the YouTube video here in the comments. We'll link to that article. The other resource recommendation is kind of related to the sermon. We talked about the brevity of our lives, the shortness of time, and just our weakness and smallness and transience as creatures, out of Psalm 39, verses 4-6. I think I have recommended this book before, maybe in this very venue, so apologies if this is sounding repetitive. But there's a book by a guy named Alan Noble called You Are Not Your Own. And it's just exploring various ways, very subtle ways that our culture lies to us, especially geared for kind of younger people. He's a little bit older than me, writing to kind of his own age cohort and younger. He's a college professor, so kind of maybe 40 and below, like his own sort of generation, which is pretty much my generation, down to Gen Z college students. But subtle ways that our culture kind of tells us that we belong to ourselves and that we are free to kind of define what our lives are going to be about. And while this presents itself as a kind of freedom, what it actually ends up being is a crippling burden, because we weren't made to belong to ourselves. We weren't made to handle this kind of infinite customizability of what life can be. And what it does is it pressures us to kind of justify our existence, and it pressures us to get a bunch of things done and to have this amazing life that sort of vindicates us as human beings. He says, from a Christian standpoint, the liberating truth from 1 Corinthians 6:19, and it echoes all throughout Scripture, is that we belong not to ourselves but to God, especially to Christ and redemption. And what this means is that what we're meant to be is much more constrained, and we're freed from having to kind of define what our existence is about and to justify our existence by performance and by accomplishment. But it's sort of the ability to rest in the identity of I belong to Christ, and so just even faithfulness in small things that he's called me to in my personal life, my family, my church, my workplace. Faithfulness in these ordinary things is actually much more important and much more pleasing to God than just having maybe a more visibly rich life that we can advertise to others, say on social media. That's a great temptation in our world. So I love the book. I think it's really helpful and would be very complementary to what we heard about from Psalm 39. Again, it's called You Are Not Your Own by Alan Noble. I will also try to get a link to that book in the comments of this YouTube video. With that, I want to talk a little bit about announcements for our church. We have on Sunday our equipping hour continuing. at 9 o'clock. We have corporate worship at 10:30. Because it's the first Sunday of the month, we have the Lord's Supper as part of corporate worship. We have a sack lunch right after our service, so plan to bring a lunch if you can, or go out and get something, and we can continue our fellowship over food that way. And then we have our evening service at 5 p.m. It's the first Sunday of the month. That's what we do. Gathering at 5 p.m. It's going to be kind of largely geared around prayer as well as other elements to our worship. So I want to highly recommend that. And I look forward to seeing you Sunday. With that, I'll say goodbye and God's blessings for you with the rest of the week. All right, bye-bye.